I destroyed your life in ways you never saw coming, I said, sliding the envelope across the table as my ex-husband's face went white with terror. Inside were FBI photos of his secret crimes and proof his young girlfriend had been scamming him for months. Amber's in handcuffs right now, Derek, and you're next. Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. His hands trembled as he stared at the papers. Beside him, his manipulative daughter, Courtney, the same girl who had orchestrated the lies that got me thrown out of my own home, began hyperventilating. The web of deception they had so carefully woven was finally unraveling, and I was holding all the strings. But let me back up and tell you how a quiet librarian from Millbrook became the architect of the most satisfying revenge story you'll ever hear. My name is Rebecca Chen-Martinez, and 6 months ago, I was a 45-year-old head librarian living what I thought was a peaceful life in the suburbs of Millbrook Heights. I had been married to Derek Hartwell for 3 years, a second marriage for both of us after we'd both lost our first spouses to cancer within the same year. We bonded over grief, books, and the promise of building something beautiful together. Derek was a successful contractor who owned Hartwell Construction, and I admired his work ethic and the way he seemed to genuinely care about his clients. He had inherited a beautiful Victorian home on Elm Street from his grandmother, and when we married, I moved in with him and his 22-year-old daughter, Courtney, who was supposedly saving money while working as a part-time social media influencer. I should have seen the red flags immediately, but grief and loneliness had made me desperate for connection. Courtney had never left home, despite having a trust fund from her deceased mother that could have easily afforded her own place. She treated the house like her personal kingdom, and me like an unwelcome intruder. From day one, Courtney made it clear that I would never replace her mother. Mom's garden was perfect before you touched it. She'd sneer when I tried to tend to the neglected flower beds. She knew how to cook real food, not this health-conscious garbage. She'd complain about every meal I'd prepared, even though Derek had specifically asked me to help him eat better after his doctor warned about his cholesterol. The house itself was like a shrine to Derek's first wife, Patricia. Her photos lined every hallway, her clothes still hung in half the master bedroom closet, and her favorite recipes were taped inside every cabinet door. I understood grief. I'd lost my first husband to Thomas to the same disease, but this felt deliberately preserved to make me feel like a guest in my own home. Derek seemed oblivious to his daughter's passive-aggressive behavior. When I gently mentioned Courtney's latest slight, he'd dismiss it with, "She's still processing her mother's death, give her time." But it had been 5 years since Patricia passed, and if anything, Courtney's behavior was getting worse, not better. The real problem started when I began receiving recognition at work. The Millbrook Public Library system had been struggling with outdated technology and declining community engagement. I spearheaded a digital transformation initiative that brought coding classes for seniors, virtual reality experiences for teenagers, and makerspaces that turned our libraries into community innovation hubs. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, featured me on the front page with the headline, "Local Librarian Revolutionizes Public Learning." The mayor invited me to speak at the town council meeting about expanding the program citywide, and I even received a state award for innovation in public service. Derek seemed proud initially, but I noticed Courtney's resentment growing with each accolade. She'd make snide comments about how I was showing off and trying to make Derek look bad. "Mom never needed to be in the newspaper to feel important," she'd mutter just loud enough for me to hear. The turning point came when the Millbrook Community Foundation offered me a consulting position that would double my salary and allow me to help libraries across 3 counties. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to make a real difference while finally achieving financial independence. That's when Courtney's sabotage campaign began in earnest. She started leaving Derek's lunch unmade, knowing he'd come home expecting me to have prepared something. She'd forget to mention important phone calls from his clients. She even began inviting her friends over for loud parties on nights when Derek had early morning job sites, knowing that I'd be the one to complain about the noise. Rebecca's becoming really controlling. I heard her tell Derek one evening when they thought I was in the shower. She's trying to change everything about our family. Mom would be so disappointed. Derek, exhausted from work and manipulated by his daughter's calculated tears, started viewing my legitimate concerns as nagging. The loving husband who had once bragged about my achievements began treating me like a burden. Little did they know, their web of lies was about to catch them in ways they never imagined. Because while they were plotting to push me out, I was quietly documenting everything, and Derek's perfect daughter and his construction business weren't nearly as clean as they appeared. The real shock was still coming, and when it hit, it would change all of our lives forever. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a respected librarian became someone capable of such calculated revenge. The warning signs started small, but they built into something that would change my life forever. 3 months after I accepted the consulting position with the Millbrook Community Foundation, Courtney's campaign against me shifted into overdrive. What had been passive-aggressive comments became outright sabotage. She began accidentally breaking my personal belongings. My grandmother's china teacup, a framed photo of my late husband Thomas, even my laptop charger the night before an important presentation. "Oops, sorry, Rebecca," she'd say with fake innocence. "I'm just so clumsy lately." Derek would simply shrug and offer to replace whatever she'd broken, completely missing the pattern. But I was documenting everything in a journal I kept locked in my desk at the library. Dates, times, witnesses, habits I'd developed from years of meticulous research work. The first major incident happened during the Millbrook Harvest Festival. I had been invited to give a speech about the library's new community programs, and Derek had promised to attend. I spent weeks preparing, even buying a new dress for the occasion. But an hour before the event, Courtney staged a dramatic anxiety attack. "I can't breathe," she sobbed, clutching her chest. "I keep thinking about how Mom used to love this festival. Rebecca being there instead of her, it's just too much." Derek immediately canceled our plans. "Family comes first," he said, barely looking at me. "You understand, right?" I drove to the festival alone, gave my speech to a crowd that included the mayor and 3 county commissioners, and received a standing ovation. The local news crew interviewed me afterward. But when I came home excited to share the success, Derek was watching a movie with Courtney, both of them acting like nothing had happened. "How'd it go?" he asked absently, not even pausing the film. "It went beautifully. Channel 7 wants to do a follow-up story about the—" "That's nice, hun. Courtney's feeling better now. We ordered pizza." The message was clear. His daughter's manufactured drama would always take priority over my real achievements. The incidents escalated. Courtney began inviting her boyfriend Marcus over at all hours, despite Derek's supposed rule about overnight guests. They'd blast music until 3 a.m., leave messes in the kitchen, and once even used my expensive skincare products to make homemade face masks that they posted on social media. When I complained to Derek, he said, "Young people will be young people. At least she's having fun at home instead of out getting into trouble." But when my nephew visited from college and asked to stay one weekend, Derek suddenly became concerned about house rules and setting boundaries. The double standard was glaring, but pointing it out only made Derek defensive. "You're being unreasonable," he'd say. "Courtney grew up here. This is her home." I thought it was our home. You know what I mean. But I was beginning to suspect I didn't know what he meant at all. The breaking point came during our 3rd wedding anniversary. I had made reservations at Chez Laurent, the French restaurant where Derek had proposed. I even arranged for the same table, thinking it would be romantic to recreate that special moment. I spent the entire day at the salon, bought a new outfit, and was putting on my jewelry when Derek walked into the bedroom looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca, I hate to do this, but Courtney's friend Amber is going through a really tough breakup. She's coming over tonight and really needs our support. Amber. I'd heard that name more and more lately. Courtney's friend, who was apparently always in crisis, always needing Derek's advice about her family business problems. Derek, it's our anniversary, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We made these reservations months ago. I know, and I'm sorry, but Amber's like family to us. She's been Courtney's best friend since high school. We can go to dinner any night. Any night except tonight, apparently? Don't be like that. You're acting jealous of a 26-year-old girl who needs help. That stung. I was acting jealous because I was starting to feel jealous, not of some young woman, but of Derek's willingness to drop everything for people who weren't his wife. I went to dinner alone that night, sitting at our special table while the waiter looked at me with barely concealed pity. The elderly couple at the next table kept glancing over, probably wondering why someone was dining solo on what was clearly meant to be a romantic evening. When I returned home, I found Derek, Courtney, and Amber gathered around the kitchen island, sharing wine and laughing like old friends. Amber was stunning, blonde, petite, with the kind of effortless beauty that comes from being young and carefree. She wore tight red dress that cost more than my monthly car payment, and her jewelry looked expensive. "Rebecca," Courtney called out with false enthusiasm, "come meet Amber. She's the one with the family construction business I was telling Dad about." Construction business. Derek had never mentioned that Amber was in his industry. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Derek's been so helpful with advice about dealing with difficult contractors. It's such a relief to have someone experienced to talk to. Something in her tone made my skin crawl. But Derek was beaming like he'd just solved world hunger. Amber's family company is having some cash flow issues, he explained. I've been helping her understand the business side of things. Cash flow issues. Family business. A beautiful young woman who needed Derek's expertise and made him feel important. I didn't need a psychology degree to see what was happening. But I also knew that pointing out my suspicions would only make me look paranoid and insecure. So I smiled, made polite conversation, and went to bed early, leaving Derek to his business consultation. That night, lying alone in our bed while my husband gave career advice to a woman young enough to be his daughter, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my marriage. Derek was no longer seeing me as his partner. I was becoming the obstacle standing between him and the uncomplicated admiration of younger women who made him feel needed. What I didn't know yet was that Amber's family business was anything but legitimate, and Derek was about to get involved in something that would destroy everything he'd worked for. I also didn't know that Courtney had been planning this introduction for months, or that both women saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient speed bump on their road to easy money. The lies were multiplying, the disrespect was escalating, and I was about to discover just how deep the deception really went. The discovery that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I had called in sick to work, something I rarely did, because I'd been fighting a persistent headache for 3 days. Derek left early for a job site in neighboring Westfield County, and Courtney had supposedly gone to her part-time job at the boutique downtown. I was finally starting to feel human again around 10 a.m. when I heard a car door slam in our driveway. Thinking Derek had forgotten something, I wrapped my robe tighter and went to the front window. Instead of Derek's white pickup truck, I saw a sleek black BMW, Amber's car. But she wasn't alone. Derek climbed out of the passenger seat, laughing at something she'd said. They looked intimate, comfortable, like this wasn't the first time they'd driven somewhere together during work hours. My stomach dropped as I watched Derek lean down to kiss her cheek before she drove away. He came through the front door whistling, clearly not expecting me to be home. "Rebecca, what are you doing here?" He looked genuinely startled,
maybe even guilty. I'm sick, remember? You brought me tea this morning before you left for Westfield. I studied his face. How did you get home? Where's your truck? Oh, there is an issue with the transmission. Amber happened to be driving past the job site and offered me a ride. Small world, right? Small world indeed. Especially since Amber lived on the complete opposite side of town from Derek's job site, and Westfield County was a 40-minute drive in the wrong direction from anywhere she'd logically be going. That was nice of her, I said carefully. What was she doing all the way out in Westfield? The pause lasted just a beat too long. Business meeting, something about materials for her family's projects. I nodded and smiled, playing the trusting wife, while my mind raced. After Derek left again, claiming he needed to take an Uber back to get his truck, I did something I'd never done in any relationship. I went through his things. His laptop was password protected, but Derek had always been terrible with technology. I found his password written on a sticky note inside his desk drawer. Patricia, 1997, his late wife's name and the year they married. Even his passwords were shrines to his first marriage. What I found in his email made me physically sick. Dozens of messages between Derek and Amber going back 4 months. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future together. Amber had convinced Derek to invest his business profits into her family construction company, which apparently specialized in high-end residential projects for wealthy clients who preferred to keep things off the books for tax purposes. The amounts were staggering. Derek had already transferred over $180,000 from his business accounts to various LLCs that Amber controlled. He'd even taken out the second mortgage on our house, to fund what he believed was a joint venture that would make them both rich. The most damning email was from just 3 days ago. Derek, baby, I know this is hard, but Rebecca is holding you back from your full potential. She's gonna figure out what we're doing eventually, and then everything will be ruined. Courtney agrees that her stepmother has become a problem. Maybe it's time to make some changes before the Grandview Heights project launches next month. You deserve someone who believes in your dreams. Exoso, A. Grandview Heights? I knew that area. It was where the city was planning a new luxury development, but the project had been stalled for months due to zoning issues and environmental concerns. What kind of construction work was Amber's company doing on a development that didn't officially exist yet? I took screenshots of everything and stored them in a cloud drive that Derek didn't know about. Then I kept digging. Amber's family construction company was registered as Sunshine Holdings, LLC, incorporated 6 months ago. The registered address was a mailboxes, etc. location downtown. She had no business license, no contractor's insurance, and no history of any legitimate construction projects. But she did have a criminal history. Amanda Caroline Winters, Amber's real name, had been arrested twice in the neighboring state of Virginia for securities fraud and identity theft. She'd served 18 months in minimum security prison and was currently on probation. Her known associates included several individuals connected to money laundering operations and construction bid rigging schemes.
My hands were shaking as I printed everything. Derek wasn't just having an affair with a younger woman. He was being systematically scammed by a professional criminal. And based on the email exchange, Courtney was not only aware of the affair, but actively encouraging it. That evening, Derek came home earlier than usual, carrying flowers and wearing the kind of guilty smile that suggested he was overcompensating for something. "Feeling better, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my forehead. "I brought your favorites, those white roses from Garden Paradise." They weren't my favorites. White roses were Patricia's favorites. I preferred sunflowers, had told him so dozens of times, but he'd never bothered to remember. Even his guilt gifts we meant for his dead wife. "They're beautiful," I lied. "How was work?" Good. Got the truck fixed. Turned out to be a simple fix, just needed some transmission fluid." Another lie. I'd called his mechanic that afternoon, pretending to be checking on the bill. There had been no truck repairs. Courtney bounced in around dinner time, unusually cheerful. Dad, Amber invited us to this amazing restaurant opening next weekend. It's supposed to be super exclusive, like celebrities and business people. She can get us on the VIP list. Derek's face lit up. That sounds great, Rebecca, you'll love it. Amber has such good connections in this town. I smiled and nodded while my heart broke a little more. My own husband was more excited about a restaurant opening with his mistress than he'd been about our anniversary dinner. Over the next few days, I continued my investigation while maintaining a facade of normalcy. What I discovered made Derek's betrayal look like small potatoes compared to what Amber was really planning. The Grandview Heights project wasn't stalled. It was being deliberately delayed while someone bought up surrounding properties at artificially low prices. Amber's family business was part of a sophisticated land fraud scheme involving falsified environmental reports, bribed city officials, and shell companies designed to hide the real investors. Derek wasn't just being cheated on emotionally and financially, he was being set up as the fall guy for a multi-million-dollar real estate fraud. When the scheme inevitably collapsed, his legitimate construction business would be holding the bag for all the illegal transactions, while Amber and her real partners disappeared with the profits. The most sickening part was a recorded phone conversation I found on Derek's laptop. Apparently, Amber had sent it to him as proof of her business connections. In it, she laughed about how easy it was to manipulate lonely middle-aged men with dead wives and daddy issues. Derek's so desperate to feel important again, she giggled to someone on the other end. He actually thinks I love him, and his daughter is just as pathetic. She'd do anything to get rid of the stepmother. They're both so eager to be useful. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling rage. Pure, cold, calculating rage. Derek and Courtney hadn't just betrayed me. They've made themselves willing accomplices to criminals who were laughing at their stupidity. Amber wasn't just stealing Derek's money, she was planning to destroy his reputation, his business, and potentially send him to prison for crimes he was too besotted to recognize. But here's what none of them knew. I wasn't just a quiet librarian who could be pushed around indefinitely. I had spent 20 years helping people research complex problems, and I had connections throughout the state library system, including several former colleagues who had moved on to careers in law enforcement and investigative journalism. Most importantly, I had something Amber didn't expect Derek's naive wife to possess: complete financial records of every transaction Derek had made, every email he had sent, and every piece of evidence needed to prove that he was a victim of fraud rather than a willing participant in crime. The game was about to change, and I was finally ready to start playing by my own rules. The next morning, I called in sick again and drove straight to the Millbrook Police Department. But instead of filing a complaint, I asked to speak with Detective Sarah Blackstone, whom I'd helped research cold cases during the library's community outreach program. Sarah was smart, thorough, and most importantly, she understood how to build ironclad cases. Rebecca, this is quite a mess you've uncovered, but we need to be strategic about this. If we move too quickly, Amber and her partners will disappear, and Derek could still face serious charges as an accomplice. What do you mean? Your husband has willingly transferred money to known criminals and signed documents for fraudulent projects. Even if he was manipulated, prosecutors might argue he should have done due diligence. We need to prove he was deliberately deceived and gather evidence on the entire network. Sarah introduced me to FBI agent Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in financial crimes. What he told me made my blood run cold. Miss Chen-Martinez, your husband isn't Amber's first victim. We've been tracking this organization for 8 months. They target recently widowed or divorced men in the construction industry, usually through romance scams combined with fake business opportunities. Derek is actually their biggest score so far. Agent Rodriguez showed me files on 3 other men in neighboring counties who had lost everything to similar schemes.
One had committed suicide after losing his family business and retirement savings, and another was serving 2 years in federal prison because he couldn't prove his innocence. We need Derek to cooperate, but we can't approach him directly. If he panics and confronts Amber, she'll vanish, and we'll lose our chance to catch the entire network. Can you help us?
This was my moment of truth. I could have said no, filed for divorce, and walked away. Part of me wanted to let Derek face the consequences of his betrayal. But seeing those files of other destroyed families made me realize this was bigger than my marriage. What do you need me to do? Over the next week, I became an undercover operative in my own home. The FBI provided me with recording equipment disguised as everyday objects: a pen that captured audio, a phone charger that transmitted conversations, even a decorative picture frame with a hidden camera. My first target was Courtney. If she was actively helping Amber manipulate Derek, I needed to understand how deep her involvement went. That Thursday evening, I offered to take Courtney shopping for her birthday, something I'd never done before. She seemed surprised but pleased, probably thinking she'd finally broken me down. "You know, Courtney," I said as we browsed through boutiques downtown, "I've been thinking about what you said before about how Derek deserves someone who appreciates him more." Her eyes lit up. "Really? I mean, I just want Dad to be happy. Amber seems to make him very happy. How long have they been close?" Courtney glanced around nervously, then leaned in conspiratorially. "Dad doesn't know I know, but they've been seeing each other for months. Amber's amazing. She really understands business, and she makes Dad feel young again. It must be nice for him to have someone who shares his professional interests." "Exactly. And Rebecca?" She caught herself using my name instead of avoiding it. "I mean, you're great with books and library stuff, but Dad needs someone who gets the construction world. Amber's family has been in development for generations." I nodded sympathetically while the hidden recorder captured every word. That makes sense. I suppose I should probably start thinking about making some changes in my life, too. "You should totally do that. Amber even said she knows some great divorce lawyers if you ever need recommendations. She's been through this before with her own family situations." Amber had divorce lawyers on standby. Of course she did. The next phase was the most difficult: pretending to support Derek's business ventures while gathering evidence of the fraud. Agent Rodriguez had coached me on what questions to ask and what documents to obtain. That weekend, Derek was practically glowing when he announced that the Grandview Heights project was moving forward. "Amber's family secured the final permits," he said excitedly. "We're looking at a $15 million development. My cut alone will be enough to retire early and maybe travel the world." "That's wonderful, honey. I'd love to understand more about the project. Could you show me the contracts and permits?" Derek hesitated. "It's pretty technical business stuff. I don't want to bore you with details. But if we're talking about retiring early, shouldn't I understand our financial situation? What if something happens to you and I need to manage these investments?" It was the perfect approach. Practical, wifely concern that Derek couldn't argue against without seeming irresponsible. He reluctantly showed me the documents, which I photographed with my modified phone while he wasn't looking. The papers were sophisticated forgeries, but Agent Rodriguez had taught me what to look for. The permit numbers didn't match city records. The environmental signatures were from officials who had never worked on the project, and the bank routing numbers led to accounts that had been closed for months. "Derek, have you actually visited the Grandview Heights site recently?" I asked casually. "Not yet, but Amber's taking me out there next week to see the progress." I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. There was no progress because there was no legitimate project. Meanwhile, I was building my exit strategy. I quietly transferred my personal savings to a new account at a different bank, one that Derek had never been associated with. I gathered all my important documents, birth certificate, passport, professional licenses, and stored them in a safety deposit box downtown. Most importantly, I consulted with Catherine Walsh,
one of the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state. Catherine specialized in cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. Catherine, this is actually excellent timing, Catherine explained during our confidential meeting. If Derek is about to be arrested for financial crimes, filing a divorce beforehand protects you from being considered a co-conspirator. We can also claim that his fraudulent investments constitute dissipation of marital assets. What does that mean? It means not only will you be protected from his debts, but he'll owe you for every penny he stole from our marriage to fund his affair and illegal activities. We're talking about full asset protection plus punitive damages. Catherine helped me document Derek's secret mortgage on our house, his business account transfers, and his use of joint credit cards to fund his relationship with Amber. In legal terms, Derek had been systematically looting our marriage to pay for his own destruction. The hardest part was maintaining my performance at home. Every night, Derek would come home and kiss me hello, while I knew he'd spent his lunch break with his criminal mistress. Courtney would make snide comments about my cooking, while I knew she was actively plotting my removal from the family. But I was no longer the woman they thought they could manipulate. I was gathering evidence, building alliances, and preparing for a confrontation that would expose their lies and crimes in the most public way possible.
Agent Rodriguez kept me updated on the investigation's progress. They had identified Amber's real partners, a sophisticated network operating across 4 states, with connections to organized crime families in major cities. Derek wasn't just being scammed, he was being recruited as an unwitting front for money laundering operations. "We're planning to move next week," Rodriguez told me during one of our secret meetings at the library. "Amber's getting nervous about the timeline, and our sources suggest she's preparing to disappear with whatever money she's collected." "What about Derek?" "That depends on how well he cooperates when we arrest him. If he's willing to testify against the network and can prove he was deceived, he might avoid prison time. But his business and personal assets will likely be seized as evidence." Perfect. By the time Derek realized what was happening, I would already be legally separated from his debts and disasters. And Courtney, who had been so eager to see me gone, was about to discover what life was like without someone to clean up her messes and subsidize her lifestyle. The final pieces were falling into place, and I was almost ready to destroy the people who had tried to destroy me. The morning everything unraveled started like any other Tuesday. Derek left early for what he thought was a final inspection of the Grandview Heights site before the big groundbreaking ceremony Amber had promised him. Courtney was still asleep, probably dreaming about the expensive car Derek had promised to buy her once his investment paid off. At exactly 9:47 a.m., my phone rang. "It's happening," Agent Rodriguez said simply. "We just arrested Amber at the fake construction site. Derek's being brought in for questioning, but he's not under arrest yet. Are you ready?" I had been ready for weeks. By 10:30 a.m., Derek was calling me from the FBI field office, his voice shaking with panic and confusion. "Rebecca, I don't understand what's happening. They're saying Amber is a criminal, that the business was fake. They want me to call you and ask you to come down here with our financial records." "Of course, honey, I'll be right there." What Derek didn't know was that I had already provided the FBI with copies of everything they needed. This call was just part of their strategy to make him realize how completely he'd been deceived. I arrived at the FBI office with Catherine Walsh, my attorney, which immediately told Derek that his world was about to get much worse. "Rebecca, why do you have a lawyer? We're the victims here." Agent Rodriguez laid out the evidence methodically. Photos of Amber with known criminals, bank records showing Derek's money being funneled into offshore accounts, recordings of Amber laughing about how easy it was to manipulate pathetic widowers. But the most devastating evidence was the recording I had made of Courtney admitting her role in the scheme. Derek's face went white as his daughter's voice filled the room.
Courtney even said she knows some great divorce lawyers if you ever need recommendations. She's been through this before with her own family situations. Courtney knew? Whispered Derek. She didn't just know, I said, finally dropping my supportive wife act. She helped plan it. She's been feeding Amber information about your finances, your schedule, even your emotional vulnerabilities. That anxiety attack during the Harvest Festival, she was making sure you'd choose her over me when Amber needed to move the relationship forward. Derek looked like he was going to be sick. That's impossible. Courtney would never. Derek, Agent Rodriguez interrupted, your daughter received over $20,000 in cash payments from Amber's associates over the past 4 months. We have surveillance footage of the transactions. The truth hit Derek like a physical blow. His own child had sold him out for money. Mr. Hartwell, my client will be filing for divorce based on adultery, financial fraud, and dissipation of marital assets. She'll also be seeking full ownership of the family home, alimony, and compensation for emotional distress. But Rebecca, I was tricked. I thought I was building a future for us. You mortgaged our house without telling me, Derek. You spent our savings on your mistress. You chose a criminal over your wife at every opportunity. The fact that you were too blinded by flattery to see the obvious doesn't make you innocent. It makes you responsible. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Mr. Hartwell, you have 2 choices. You can cooperate fully with our investigation, testify against Amber's network, and accept responsibility for your actions, in which case you might avoid prison time. Or you can continue claiming you're a victim and face federal charges for money laundering and conspiracy to commit fraud. Derek chose cooperation, but it was too late to save our relationship with me. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Catherine Walsh had documented every secret transaction, every lie, every penny Derek had stolen from our marriage to fund his affair. The judge was particularly unimpressed when we revealed that Derek had used credit cards in my name to buy Amber expensive jewelry and pay for romantic weekend getaways. Mr. Hartwell, Judge Morrison said during our final hearing, you have systematically betrayed not only your marriage vows, but your fiduciary responsibility to your spouse. This court finds that your conduct was willful, deceptive, and financially devastating to Mrs. Chen-Martinez.
Derek was ordered to pay me $75,000 in immediate compensation, transfer full ownership of the house to me, and provide monthly alimony for 5 years. Since his business assets were frozen as part of the federal investigation, he would have to find creative ways to meet these obligations. But Derek's financial problems were nothing compared to what happened to Courtney. Without Derek's income to support her lifestyle, and with her trust fund depleted by years of reckless spending, Courtney was forced to move out of the family home for the first time in her adult life. She applied for dozens of jobs, only to discover that her social media influencer career hadn't provided her with any actual marketable skills. The final insult came when she tried to move in with her boyfriend Marcus, only to learn that he had been cheating on her with 2 other women. Apparently, Courtney's charm wasn't as irresistible as she'd believed. She eventually found a studio apartment in the worst part of town and a job waiting tables at a chain restaurant. The princess who had once sneered at my cooking was now asking customers if they wanted to make their fries a large for an extra $1. Derek, meanwhile, was working construction jobs for other contractors while living in a 1-bedroom apartment and making payments on the massive debt he'd incurred. His own business was permanently destroyed, his reputation in the industry ruined, and his relationship with his daughter irreparably damaged. As for Amber, she received a 12-year federal sentence for orchestrating the fraud network. Her real partners, as predicted, had disappeared the moment she was arrested, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The woman who had laughed about manipulating pathetic middle-aged men was now spending her days in federal prison, where her beauty and charm meant absolutely nothing. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Derek. He was in court-mandated therapy, working to understand how his grief and insecurity had made him vulnerable to manipulation. He apologized for the pain he'd caused and asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation. I returned the letter unopened. Today, I live alone in the beautiful Victorian house that Derek once shared with his first wife's ghost. I've redecorated completely, turning Patricia's shrine into my own space filled with books, art, and plants that I actually know how to grow. The library consulting business is thriving, and I've been invited to speak at conferences across the country about digital transformation in public institutions. Most importantly, I've learned to trust my instincts. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. When someone consistently chooses others over you, stop waiting for them to change their priorities. Derek thought he was trading up when he chose a young criminal over his educated, accomplished wife. Courtney thought she was getting rid of an unwanted stepmother who cramped her lifestyle. Amber thought she was scamming another lonely, desperate man. Instead, they discovered that the quiet librarian they had underestimated was more than capable of destroying all of them without breaking a sweat. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's proving that you never needed them in the first place. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.